My first guest this week is Khalil Osiris. He is the founder of Reflecting Freedom Network, a nonprofit charity that provides free web-based accredited education and job skills training for people and communities impacted by incarceration. He's also focused on what he calls truth and reconciliation conversations, having the true, honest conversations about race that we need, which I definitely appreciate. I invited him on the show to discuss his incarceration, how he turned his life around, and what he's doing to help others avoid the same fate. Khalil, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Charles.
Well, I wanted to talk to you because you speak about a very important subject, and it's not talked about enough, except for people who have been through it, and they try to scream to those of us who just don't pay attention to it. And we'll get into some of the details of you try to help people motivate themselves. You try to talk to people about what they can do to control their own destiny. You talk about minimize recidivism and all that kind of things. And we get to those because obviously you spent time in prison. And I guess we should start from the beginning and find out how you ended up there. So you were in prison for 20 years, right?
Yes. And, you know, when you first hear that 20 years, there's always kind of the shock factor of, my God, who did you kill? Or who did you rape? You know, what heinous offense did you commit? I went to prison for robbery. And it was my second offense because my first conviction, I was 17 years old. I had been an outstanding student academically, a promising athlete, a kid who was seemingly well-adjusted in my early childhood. And one of those kind of individuals you think is smart enough and responsible enough with enough common sense to do the right thing when faced with a difficult choice. But certainly you wouldn't have thought of me as someone who was going to go out and deliberately commit crimes and be lawless. I didn't come from a household where that was acceptable behavior. And so there's a kind of incongruence. There's a challenge to the stereotypical view of how someone ends up in prison serving such a long sentence. All of the stereotypes in my case don't apply. Mm-hmm. And I say that simply to bear in on the fact that I wanted to be understood right from the beginning that I take responsibility for being there. And it's important for me to say that because I have friends who are innocent, who are in prison, and who were innocent. One of my closest friends was recently released. October of last year was released, and now we're working together. We had been cellmates in prison and was an incredibly positive human being there on a wrongful conviction. So, and I remember leaving prison, and I know I'm getting ahead of the story, Charles, but I remember leaving prison and thinking, I'm a guilty person. I know that I was in prison for offenses I committed. In fact, I did more than I was in prison for, because rarely is one arrested for everything that they've done when one is committing crimes. Right. So I had to look at myself and be reflective about what kind of human being do I choose to be? Do I choose to hide behind the convenient explanation of it's a criminal justice system that's broken? Do I choose to hide behind the fact that there's racism, systemic racism, historical injustice? Do I stand behind any of those kinds of barriers or excuses? No. Those things can be true, and I can be responsible for my behavior in the midst of it. Both things can be true. It's not binary.
Right.
So, yeah.
I was just going to say that's important. Let's sit there for a minute before we get into the other ones. We got a little bit of time here because that's important. And a lot of the conversations we hear out there, if you ever listen to the show, and my point is always about finding solutions, and you can't find solutions when you're only going to face the convenient part of the problem. And you make a wonderful point in saying both things can be true. So if you talk about personal responsibility, the other side will say, well, you're ignoring racism and injustices. If you talk about racism and injustices, the other side, you're ignoring personal responsibility. Well, both are true and both are important, and you can't leave one and the other out. And that's the reason why it's so obvious it makes me upset, because that's the reason why we can't come to a solution. You can change all the laws you want to fix what you think is the problem, but unless you address why Johnny feels it's okay to put a gun in someone's face, Johnny's still going to end up in trouble. So you need to focus on that as well. But I also want to go back to the other piece, because I didn't know you were going to say that, but that's really important. You were starting to talk about how you felt being released. So you're in there with a guy, you know what you're guilty of. And like you say, the other things that you're convicted for, you're in there with a guy who's innocent. I mean, that's got to be heavy. I mean, to have somebody innocent in jail is crazy. But now it's even worse for you, because now you're getting released and he's still there. So that's in your head. And you're like, man, now I did what I'm convicted for and I'm getting out and this guy is still here. That had to weigh pretty heavy on you.
It was deeply motivating, because I had made a commitment to doing work that reflected the best of who I am. I knew how to do the worst of who I was. I had become expert in that. I knew how to get the worst outcomes out of even mediocre decisions. I figured out a way to get to prison, not once, but twice. At 17, I committed a robbery, and people will ask, well, what made you commit a robbery? I was reckless. I was angry. I was just like so many young people that you see out there with no direction, angry at the world, sees no real future being something that they want to necessarily embrace. In other words, a future is something that's nebulous. You have the moment, and right now doesn't look good, no matter what you're saying. So for me, I was simply reckless. And at 17, when you're reckless and you're tried as an adult, see, it's only delinquency when you're under 18. It becomes crime when you're over 18. Or if you're 17 and you're acting like you're an adult, they'll say, okay, we welcome your adult-like thinking and your adult-like language and your adult-like behavior. We welcome that in this courtroom. Right. And I was sentenced to prison. I served 5 years, from 17 to 22. And let me just say this, by the time I got out, however bad a person I was imagined to be prior to going in, it was amplified. Whatever the worst tendencies that someone else saw before I even realized what they were amplified under those circumstances. And so I was released at 22, and the outcome was pretty predictable. I went back to criminal behavior, this time with a much more intentional frame of mind, and certainly with much more vigor than before.
And unfortunately, a new set of skills that you learned in prison. I teach you the things that you shouldn't be learning instead of what you should be learning.
I had been in boot camp. I had been in Camp Lejeune.
Wow.
I was now, imagine, 17 to 22. You put it in a military context. As a 17-year-old, you go off to the military, come out about 22 or so, and you ask, how's the guy doing? Well, depends on where he went. After Lejeune, they shipped me out to Iraq. and there was some heavy fire there. So the point is that we have to look at our experiences and ask ourselves what we choose to do with them. Because the experiences are there. You cannot undo the experience. And so for me, because I was in the throes of the experience, I didn't have any distance between me or my thinking and what was going on. I was in pure reaction mode. I was in a state of absolute compulsivity. I never knew what kind of human being that I was capable of becoming at 17 years old. I had no idea how deeply wounded a human being could become. And you're 17, 18, 19 years old. In my case, because I had never been a violent person, I had to be that way premeditatedly. So if I thought you were going to do something to me, I was going to be preemptive.
Coming up, more with Khalil Osiris, author of A Freedom That Comes From Within. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
Now, more of The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer, with your host, Charles Love.
Welcome back. We are having an honest conversation about criminal justice and personal responsibility with Khalil Osiris, founder of Reflecting Freedom Network and the facilitator for the Truth and Reconciliation Conversations. Here is our second clip. Yeah, we have to definitely get to your program and what you fixed. But I have another question because this is one of the two things that I think is so important that's being ignored. We talked about one a little bit, but the other is this. Whatever you think of prisons, you got people who say, let everybody out, reform it a little bit, lower the severity of the crimes of when people go, lower the times, give them mental health treatment, whatever the case is. The one thing that's consistent across all prisons in the world, and that I don't get, private or public doesn't matter, is that we decide as a society, whatever the laws are, that if you do certain things, you need to be in prison, whether it's to punish you or to correct your behavior. That's fine. We'll deal with that later. But while you're there, I do not understand. I was just speaking to someone, I had Beth Deacon on, and she wrote a book. She taught for 3 years in a maximum security prison. Anybody that has anything to do with prison, I ask them this question. So why is it that we haven't figured out that it's completely deplorable and inhumane that as a government, we can't protect the people who are in prison while they're there? So you're there because you're a murderer and we don't want you on the street. Fine. But it doesn't mean that you get to live the way you were living on the streets in the prison. So you take that 17-year-old kid who's done some wrong, and he's right on the cusp, and he could lean either way. And they get worse because, like you said, premeditated. You have to feel, you have that fight or flight. You have to feel like you need to be in that mode all the time because it's dangerous in prison. So my simple question is, why is it dangerous in prison? That's what the correction officers are for. Why aren't we tasked to make sure you can serve your time? And if you want to turn your life around, you get out. If you just want to keep acting crazy and be a knucklehead, we'll keep you in prison. But both guys need to be protected. You don't get to bully somebody, to take their stuff, to force. There should not be gangs in prison.
Okay, so
and why
Charles,
no one sees that?
That is an incredible point. I mean, it's a very important point that you're bringing up, because that was part of my journey. My journey went from being completely reactionary and simply reacting to whatever was happening in my environment, understanding that there was a lawlessness that was ordered in a way as a kind of behavioral management. Mm-hmm. So when people were really divided and at each other's throat, thinking the other is the enemy, that was a manageable situation in terms of offsetting the balance of competing interest in the prison environment. So there was a level of, just from a managerial standpoint, there was a level of efficiency embedded in that kind of system, because you also have informants, you have a whole host of things where you're going to get intelligence firsthand from some of the top players, because they are able to do certain things that are clearly in violation of the rules. But guess what? That's what we see in society. Right. We see opportunities for informants to go in and do things illegal themselves. We know it's illegal. They go in and do it, and then they get off the hook. So I'm saying, so if in many ways, prison is a microcosm of society. It's the bottom line. It's a microcosm of it. When I talk about my prison experience, Charles, here's how I like to frame it. Prison is a metaphor for self-imposed limitations. And the majority of people who are in prison actually will never see the inside of a jail. We engage in socially sanctioned, self-imposed limitations. We walk into a room, and for no other reason than the color of our skin, we think we're inferior or superior to someone else. We walk into a room, and I'm not talking about black and white. I'm talking about a light-skinned black person and a dark-skinned black person. Before we can even talk about black and white racism, there's some woundedness internally that we don't look at careful enough to examine it, because it's painful, because it's something that we call an internalized wound. So here's what I say about that. As long as we keep ignoring those kinds of things about ourselves, we will continue to be complicitous in the injustices and the inhumanity that we so vigorously complain about. We must turn a light on ourselves as a starting point. So for me, prison, the place that I got to, that I was able to grow into my understanding about it, was I constructed a range of choices that were intentional, reckless but intentional. I know that regardless of what anyone else says, because my story is not someone else's story. My story is what I know I'm responsible for. And if I get up in front of a young man and don't speak the truth to him, and I try to tell him that the whole system's stacked against you because you're African American, you're black male, everybody's against you, you have no power, you may as well just give up. For me, that is such a shameful way to approach the process of truth telling when it comes to, first and foremost, tell him why I was there, that I'm responsible for. The system stuff, he can get that everybody's going to tell him that. He doesn't have to get any lesson on that from me. What I want to tell him about is how powerful I was in creating a situation that I then was even more powerful in deconstructing. So in prison, I had a simple philosophy, Charles, when I went back to prison and realized that the only answer was me. Here's what I came up with: turn the cell into a classroom and the prison into a university.
That is a great way to end the prison talk. Let's move on from prison talks. I think we gave people enough to think about that they probably don't hear it in the way we approach it. And that's the only way you fix it. And I appreciate that. Because the next thing is, that's the next logical step. When did the light switch come on? When did you say, what I'm doing is not working? And until I change what's in this small circle, what's out there won't make a difference, because I'll just keep ending up here.
I had a series of things happen along the way that I knew wasn't going to go well. I knew I was making some choices. I was making some decisions. I was engaged in some things that there's a point at which you have to be truthful with yourself, or you at least come to a place where you only can see you in the mirror. And the questions you ask, there's no room for lies. There's only you in that mirror. There's no one else going to talk to you but you. So when I got sentenced to 15 to 75 years at 25 years old, which was essentially a life sentence, and I'm thinking 75 years, I'm 25, that's 100 years. I don't even know anybody 100 in my family or on the streets, let alone in prison. This is not the way it's supposed to go. And so that was a dramatic kind of crisis of, where do I go from here? It was an existential crisis. Where do I go from here? Because I'm not going home, that's for sure. And where I have been sentenced, I made choices along the way that have created this circumstance. And because I know that about my circumstance, it's now a question of, what will I do with it? What's possible? I know what I've done in the past. So that's from the known. I could operate from the known, and that's where most of us live. We live in the known. We get up in the morning and everything we do is from the known. We get into a conversation and it's always from the known. But I wanted to explore what was, for me, something that was possible. And that was change my life. Not forget this was about, how do I choose to live my life? And does that reflect the best human being that I imagine myself to be? Is that the best that I can bring to this occasion? Because if it's not, then how do I change that? How do I change it? And so those questions became inescapable.
Coming up, more with Khalil Osiris, founder of Reflecting Freedom Network. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
Nothing else matters.
Now, more of The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer, with your host, Charles Love.
Welcome back. We are talking with Khalil Osiris, founder of Reflecting Freedom Network. In this clip, Khalil discusses what made him change his life, the importance of education, and the interesting group he includes when he talks about focusing on the people impacted by incarceration. You realized it was you. You said, what can I change? And took on the responsibility to change things. So we moved down the road. In prison, you get a bachelor's and a master's degree. At some point, you get released. So as good as that is, because most people don't end up getting a degree, much less a master's degree, there's always these particulars. Where do I work? How do I get a job? What do I want to do? But in addition to that, at some point you decided, I want to help people. I want to make a change and reach people that aren't being reached. What made you decide that that was going to be the path that you took?
First of all, for me, the most powerful thing that happened that changed my life was education. Mm-hmm. The opportunity to engage in a rigorous education that I understood was for the purpose of bringing it to others, making sure others benefited as well. In fact, the program that we had in Boston University, the only major was liberal arts. And the woman, Elizabeth Mull Barker, who is one of the founders of it, I remember her and I talking, and she said to me, she said, the reason why we only have a liberal arts degree in this program and why I'm so excited about you being in it, Khalil, is because historically a liberal arts degree was considered a degree of the economic elite. It was a degree befitting free men, the literal language of the liberal arts, the history of the liberal arts degree. People didn't go to school to get a job. They went to school for the love of learning. And that was thus the liberal arts tradition. And so we were very clear, those of us who had the opportunity the privilege to participate in that program, that it was for a purpose bigger than ourselves. And we needed to think about that as we were earning that degree. So when I came out, what I realized is I was part of 0.0001% of incarcerated people around the world who had an opportunity to do that. So what I was looking at, how do we reach the masses of people where they are with something that's meaningful, that's educational, and connected to career opportunities? So I created Reflecting Freedom Network, focused on addressing the challenges of individuals and communities impacted by incarceration. So I didn't want to just look at individuals. I also wanted to look at families and communities. And when I say impacted by incarceration, I'm also talking about correctional staff. I'm talking about people in corrections who are on the law enforcement side. Because what you learn after you have really done kind of a deep dive is that when you go into a prison, the prisoner and the guards are essentially the same socioeconomic class. One is typically rural and the other is urban, but they're the same socioeconomic class, which means they typically have about the same levels of education and social attainment. And in many of those instances, when you begin to look at it carefully, you realize this system is self-perpetuating in ways that we're not even cognizant of, we're not even paying attention to. So if you're going to go in and say you want to impact that situation in a way that's beneficial to everyone involved, you want the same opportunity for an education or career advancement to go to the correctional officer's children and family as the person who is the offending person. I mean, that's what restorative justice means. Recognizing harm has been done, that there's a person, someone has been harmed, and we need to hear that person, see that person, recognize that the harm that's been done to that person. Number two, have acknowledgement from an offending person of what harm he or she has created. And number three, involve our community in a way that facilitates healing and reconciliation. So the restorative part of that. So when I looked at Reflecting Freedom Network as my structure for building an organization that could impact individuals and communities, my primary concern was to use education and career/job opportunities and say to the and it's completely free, Charles. Here's what you have to understand. Our program is completely free to the end user. That means a person right now listening to this program can go to onenetworkusa.com and just see for themselves the services that are available for free, 100% free to them. And it's designed to be that way because my goal is to remove all the barriers to people being law-abiding, successful citizens. I want every barrier that a young man who is angry and without a clear vision about where to go next, whatever he says is the barrier for him finding his way, I want to be able to say to him concretely, here are resources and opportunities. What we need from you is a desire and a commitment.
Man, it is refreshing hearing someone talk about solutions rather than what feels good. More with Khalil Osiris, author of A Freedom That Comes From Within. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
The Charles Love Show continues on AM 560, The Answer. Here's Charles Love.
Welcome back. We are continuing our conversation with Khalil Osiris, founder of Reflecting Freedom Network. We are talking about criminal justice, personal responsibility, how to turn things around, and effective solutions. And he has a thing called Truth and Reconciliation Conversations. And if those conversations are anything like the conversation we're having, you're going to want to check that out. In this clip, I ask him what is wrong with the way we are dealing with incarcerated people today. What is wrong with the way we are addressing offenders now?
One of the challenges that we have is this thing called accountability. And what I mean by that is we have what's called $1 million blocks. Across the United States, there are neighborhoods where there are individuals in a given block who have cost in taxes more than $1 million, that individual. Now, just think about how someone could be caught up in a criminal justice system in a way that amounts up to $1 million. So what I'm saying is, here's a person that's poor, a person that's in abject poverty, but they're able to create a cost of $1 million. Something's terribly wrong when we can pay for a person to be in prison more than we'll pay for the person to get an education. But go farther than that, Charles. The person who seems unteachable in the community goes to prison and gets a master's degree or gets a high school diploma with honors when we thought he was unteachable in the community. That means we're not doing enough in our communities, Charles. Let's go squarely there first. I keep going down to the things we have control over. And when you ask me a big question, I go down to the microcosm of it. I go to the atom, the nucleus, the DNA. And the DNA is our communities are dysfunctional because our families are wounded. People keep talking about the school to prison pipeline. I'm talking about the home to prison pipeline. So what keeps going wrong as a community and as families, there's a whole lot of work that we have to do that we're not really focused on. Like there's a whole lot of stuff we're against, but in terms of our own behavior that enables that and is complicitous in that existence, that's what I keep looking at for me. So when you ask me that question, I go to my community, I say, here's my response. I cannot tell someone else what to do, and I don't want to argue with them about what to do. What I'm able to give is an example of what I'm committed to doing and what I stand for. And when I talk to young men and young women in our community who are on the brink or who are already in trouble, I say to them very clearly, you are more powerful than you can imagine at this moment. If you created just one thought about yourself that's good, that you are committed to living up to, no one could stop you. But here's the part that goes now to emotionally where you are. And that is, so your shift is to move up over the things that you don't have any control over. There's going to always be things we don't have control over. That's the external world, right? So that's what I had to do. I looked at my life. I said, wow, there are a whole lot of things I can't control. So what is it I can control about my life? And what I realized, Charles, was I can't control my external environment, but I sure can control my internal environment. And so what is that internal environment? My thoughts, my emotions are the two biggest things that govern that internal environment that I'm talking about I need to control. So that piece, when you ask me that question about what can we do differently, what's going wrong, we're not governing our internal environment very well. And you can see the evidence of it all around us in our communities, because how can you live in a community that has high rates of crime being perpetrated within the community in a pretty much ethnically and culturally homogenous community, and you can't figure out what to do about it? We're not talking about an outside invader. We understand the protests and the police brutality and the legitimate struggle being waged to address those issues. I'm not talking about that. We've got a script out there about how we should respond to these things and what needs to come first and how we need to even talk about it, the order that it needs to be talked about in. And before you get to talking about how much we're responsible, you need to look at what's been done to us. And I get all of that, Charles. I really get all of that. I'm speaking as a person who has to come in front of the community because you asked me what's wrong. I have to come in front of the community now and be truthful and transparent. I have to bring the community the best that I am now that I have the opportunity to speak the truth into this situation. So many of us who have that obligation, who have an opportunity, choose not to do that. We want to come out of prison with the same excuse and the same kind of thinking that we went in with. We come out knowing fully well that we had committed offenses, many for which we didn't get caught. I'm telling you, as a person who's been in there, who's lived the life, who's done the things wrong, I'm saying until I can come clean about what I've done wrong, and in my conversations with others who I know are in that situation, until we can have some truth telling here, it's going to be very hard to get healing in our communities, in our families, because we wounded our families as well. So I'm simply saying that the first step is for us to examine what we're doing. Right. Not what someone else is doing, but what we're doing or not doing.
Coming up, our final segment with Khalil Osiris, author of A Freedom That Comes From Within. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
The Charles Love Show continues on AM 560, The Answer. Here's Charles Love.
Welcome back. This is our final segment with Khalil Osiris, founder of Reflecting Freedom Network. In this final segment, I give him an opportunity to talk about the work he's doing, and he talks about his truth and reconciliation conversations. his website where you can find the skills and training, and a summit he has coming up this year. Well, I mean, obviously we can go on for another hour. We can go on down other lanes, but I want to at least give you time to tell people how they can find you, find out about what you're doing so they can either support you. Hopefully we can replicate what you're doing because it makes total sense.
Yes. Okay. So Charles, I've got this initiative, Reflecting Freedom Network. People can go online at onenetworkusa.com and look me up, look up the service, get it for free. Our biggest initiative right now is called Truth and Reconciliation Conversations. And it is modeled on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of South Africa. While I was in prison, I became pen pals with Makaziwe Mandela, the eldest daughter of Nelson Mandela, and then wrote him and made a commitment that I would, once released from prison in America, literally make amends. I would honor his impact on my life by working in schools and prisons in South Africa. Well, 25 years later, I went and did that. And ultimately, we launched an initiative here in America based on the United Nations Declaration of Nelson Mandela International Day. We celebrated it in Jacksonville and in St. Augustine, Florida, and brought Dr. Makaziwe Mandela, Nelson Mandela's eldest daughter, here to Jacksonville. And she received a Global Citizens Award at Jacksonville University and a whole host of other things. It was an amazing event. So from that, when COVID hit, I did a documentary focusing on 3 questions. What is your understanding of racism? How do you feel about the murder of George Floyd? And what is your hope for the future of race relations? And I asked that question to people from the criminal justice system, from education, from business, from all walks of life. We asked, and we did these intensive interviews. It was so successful that it created a platform for us to take our next step to do a Truth and Reconciliation Global Summit, which is July 18th and 19th of this year in London at Wellcome Collection, a public museum. Mm-hmm. People can go to trcglobalsummit.org. That is trcglobalsummit.org, and sign up. You can register for free to participate in the summit. And here's our focus. We're very, very clear. All of our work is based on 5 commitments. And the 5 commitments are compassionate empathy, courageous listening, painful conversations, social reckoning, and spiritual reconciliation. And so what we realize is that people are at different places in their understanding of racism. What we all have in common is the opportunity to work together to heal and to reconcile. So this process of Truth and Reconciliation Conversations with our global summit, we will be doing a documentary, and certainly we want to make sure that all of your listeners have a chance to register, be a part of it, and we will be sending you all of the information, and we look forward to partnering with you on that because we want to hear your voice on that as well.
I appreciate that. He is Khalil Osiris, founder of Reflecting Freedom Network and author of A Freedom That Comes From Within. Khalil, it's been amazing talking with you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Have a wonderful time, Charles.